November 1st, 1943. 03:15 hours. Coromocina River, Bougainville, Solomon Islands. Private First Class John Basilone pressed his cheek against the stock of his Browning automatic rifle, watching shadows move through the jungle darkness 200 yards away. Through the rain and mud, he could hear them coming, the rhythmic chanting, the clash of bayonets against rifle stocks, thousands of voices rising from the trees, building toward a crescendo that would announce the charge. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. His BAR, all 19 pounds of machined steel and walnut, felt impossibly heavy after 4 hours of continuous fighting. The barrel glowed dull red in the darkness, hot enough to ignite the surrounding vegetation if he set it down carelessly. Beside him, 2 Marines had already died manning this position. Their bodies lay where they had fallen, still warm. Basilone had stripped their ammunition pouches, adding their magazines to his dwindling supply. Through his iron sights, the shadows resolved into human forms. Japanese soldiers of the 23rd Infantry Regiment, fixing bayonets in the darkness, officers raising their swords. Behind them, more soldiers, hundreds more, perhaps thousands, all moving forward with the disciplined precision that had conquered half of Asia. In 12 seconds, when they emerged from the tree line and began their charge, Basilone would need to fire 550 rounds per minute to have any chance of survival. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The mathematics of survival were brutally simple. The Japanese would cover 200 yards in approximately 45 seconds at a full sprint. In that time, Basilone's BAR could, theoretically, fire 412 rounds if he maintained maximum sustained rate of fire without stoppage, malfunction, or the need to change magazines. Each 20-round magazine took approximately 4 seconds to change under ideal conditions. Under combat conditions, soaking wet, in darkness, with Japanese soldiers screaming and charging toward his position, magazine changes would take longer, perhaps 6 seconds, perhaps 8. Each magazine change represented a gap in fire that would allow Japanese soldiers to advance another 20 to 30 yards unchallenged. The Browning automatic rifle that John Basilone held that night represented 15 years of American weapons development, a design philosophy that prioritized reliability and sustained firepower over elegant engineering. While other nations pursued lightweight automatic rifles that could fire from the shoulder for extended periods, American designers had created something different, a walking fire weapon that delivered rifle-caliber ammunition at machine gun rates while remaining mobile enough for one man to carry and operate. The weapon's development had begun in 1917 when John Browning, already famous for his machine gun designs, was tasked with creating an automatic rifle for American infantry in World War I. The specifications seemed contradictory. It needed to fire the powerful .30 caliber rifle cartridge. It had to be light enough for one man to carry. It required sufficient accuracy to engage targets at combat ranges. It needed to sustain automatic fire without catastrophic overheating. Most critically, it had to be reliable under the worst possible conditions. Browning delivered the prototype in February 1918. The weapon weighed 15.5 pounds unloaded, fired from a 20-round detachable box magazine, and could sustain automatic fire at rates between 300 and 650 rounds per minute, depending on gas regulator settings. Army adopted it immediately, ordering 40,000 units. Only 85,000 were produced before the armistice ended World War I, but the weapon's fundamental soundness ensured it remained in service. By 1943, when Private First Class Basilone prepared to face the Japanese charge on Bougainville, the BAR had evolved through multiple modifications. The M1918A2 variant, standard issue to Marine and Army units in the Pacific, featured several improvements over the original design. A bipod provided stability for sustained fire, a carrying handle reduced barrel contact burns. Most significantly, the selector switch now offered only 2 settings, slow automatic at 300 to 450 rounds per minute and fast automatic at 500 to 650 rounds per minute. The semi-automatic option had been eliminated based on combat experience that showed soldiers under stress would use full automatic regardless of training. The theoretical rate of fire, 550 rounds per minute in fast automatic mode, translated to just over 9 rounds per second. In practical terms, this meant that a 20-round magazine would be exhausted in approximately 2.2 seconds of sustained fire. An experienced BAR gunner could change magazines in 4 to 6 seconds under ideal conditions. Under combat conditions, magazine changes took longer, creating dangerous gaps in fire that attacking enemies could exploit. The 30-06 cartridge fired by the BAR delivered devastating terminal ballistics. The standard M2 ball ammunition featured a 152-grain full metal jacket bullet, leaving the barrel at 2,805 feet per second. At 100 yards, the bullet retained sufficient energy to penetrate 24 inches of pine wood, 8 inches of sand, or 3/8 of an inch of mild steel plate. Against unarmored human targets, the effects were catastrophic. The high-velocity projectile would create a temporary wound cavity significantly larger than the bullet diameter, causing massive tissue disruption and hydrostatic shock. Japanese infantry tactics in 1943 were built around the concept of overwhelming enemy positions through aggressive close assault. The doctrine, refined through years of combat in China, relied on speed, shock, and numerical superiority to break enemy defensive lines before superior firepower could be brought to bear. In China, where nationalist forces often lacked automatic weapons and effective artillery support, these tactics had proven devastatingly successful. Japanese infantry had developed a well-earned reputation for ferocity and effectiveness in close combat. The psychological component of the Banzai charge was as important as the physical assault. The pre-attack build-up, the war cries, the visible massing of forces, all were designed to create terror in defending troops. Japanese commanders understood that soldiers who broke and ran before contact was even made had already been defeated. The charge itself, hundreds or thousands of screaming soldiers advancing with fixed bayonets, was calculated to overwhelm the psychological defenses of enemy troops who might otherwise fight effectively from prepared positions. This doctrine, which had succeeded brilliantly against poorly equipped Chinese forces, encountered something entirely different when applied against American forces in the Pacific. The Americans brought automatic weapons in unprecedented numbers, integrated fire support from mortars and artillery, and most critically, they brought the Browning automatic rifle in squad-level distribution that transformed defensive firepower. By November 1943, American Marine Corps doctrine called for 1 BAR per 12-man rifle squad. This meant that in a typical Marine rifle company of approximately 200 men, there would be 12 to 14 BARs. In defensive positions, these weapons would be positioned to provide interlocking fields of fire, creating kill zones where attacking forces would be subjected to automatic weapons, fire from multiple directions simultaneously. The BAR gunner, trained to deliver sustained automatic fire while the riflemen around him provided aimed single shots, became the cornerstone of American defensive tactics. The Battle of Bougainville, where John Basilone would earn the Medal of Honor, exemplified the collision between Japanese assault tactics and American automatic weapons. The Japanese 23rd Infantry Regiment, part of the veteran 6th Division that had fought in China since 1937, was ordered to drive the American Marines back into the sea. These were experienced soldiers, proven in combat, led by officers who had studied American tactics in previous engagements. They understood they faced automatic weapons. They understood they would take casualties. They believed, based on their doctrine and experience, that aggressive assault would succeed if pressed home with sufficient determination. What they didn't fully understand was the fundamental transformation in defensive firepower that the BAR represented. In previous wars, defending forces armed with bolt-action rifles could fire perhaps 15 aimed shots per minute per soldier. A defensive position held by 100 men might deliver 1,500 rounds per minute total, creating a zone of fire that attacking forces could potentially overwhelm through speed and numbers. The introduction of the BAR changed these calculations catastrophically. A Marine defensive position with 100 men would now include 8 BARs. Those 8 weapons, firing at 550 rounds per minute each, delivered 4,400 rounds per minute of automatic fire. Combined with the aimed fire from 92 riflemen firing perhaps 10 rounds per minute each, the total defensive firepower approached 5,300 rounds per minute. This represented more than a 3-fold increase in volume of fire compared to previous defensive positions, fundamentally altering the mathematics of assault tactics. The 12 seconds it took for a bar to empty its 20-round magazine became the critical interval in countless Pacific War engagements. In those 12 seconds, Japanese soldiers charging across open ground would advance approximately 40 to 60 yards, depending on terrain. If the BAR gunner successfully changed magazines and resumed fire, the advance could be stopped. If the magazine change took too long, or if the weapon malfunctioned, Japanese soldiers would reach the defensive position, and the battle would devolve into close combat, where American firepower advantages disappeared. The training of BAR gunners reflected the weapon's critical importance. Unlike riflemen who received basic marksmanship training, BAR gunners underwent extensive additional instruction in weapon maintenance, malfunction clearance, and sustained fire techniques. They learned to fire in controlled bursts, rather than holding the trigger down continuously, preserving ammunition and preventing catastrophic overheating. They practiced magazine changes until they could execute them without conscious thought, in darkness, while wet, while exhausted. Most critically, BAR gunners learned to manage heat buildup. The weapon's barrel, exposed directly to air for cooling, would begin to glow red after approximately 150 rounds of sustained fire. After 300 rounds, the barrel temperature would exceed 900 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to cook off rounds in the chamber if the gunner wasn't careful. Extended firing could warp the barrel, destroying accuracy and potentially causing catastrophic failure. BAR gunners learned to fire in bursts, allowing brief cooling intervals, and to change barrels when possible, though spare barrels were rarely available in combat conditions. The weight of the BAR and its ammunition created significant logistical challenges. The weapon itself weighed 19.5 pounds loaded with a full magazine. Each additional 20-round magazine weighed approximately 1.4 pounds. A BAR gunner typically carried 12 magazines, adding 16.8 pounds to his combat load. Combined with the weapon, ammunition, helmet, combat pack, entrenching tool, grenades, canteen, and other equipment, the total load often exceeded 70 pounds. In the heat and humidity of the South Pacific, carrying this load through jungle terrain while maintaining combat effectiveness represented a tremendous physical challenge. The assistant gunner, a critical but often overlooked position, carried additional magazines for the BAR along with his own rifle. In intensive combat, the BAR could expend ammunition faster than one man could physically carry. The assistant gunner's role was to keep the weapon fed with loaded magazines, allowing the gunner to maintain continuous fire. This partnership, gunner and assistant, became a fundamental tactical unit in Marine rifle squads. The sound of the BAR became psychologically significant for both American and Japanese forces. The distinctive report, deeper and slower than the German MG-42 or Japanese Type 92, was immediately recognizable on the battlefield. American troops found the sound reassuring, evidence that their automatic weapons were in action. Japanese forces learned to target BAR positions specifically, understanding that silencing these weapons would break American defensive firepower. Japanese infantry training emphasized closing with the enemy as rapidly as possible, getting inside the effective range of American automatic weapons before casualties became catastrophic. The doctrine called for attacks during darkness or limited visibility, using terrain features for concealment during the approach, and overwhelming momentum during the final assault. These tactics recognized American firepower superiority and attempted to minimize its effectiveness through speed and shock. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The pre-attack ritual of Banzai charges served multiple purposes beyond simple psychological intimidation. The war cries helped maintain unit cohesion during the advance, allowing soldiers to maintain direction and momentum in darkness or smoke. The visible massing of forces was intended to create terror, but it also served practical purposes in coordinating the assault. Officers needed to ensure their men were formed properly before launching the attack. The chanting and sword-waving provided visual and audible signals in situations where radio communication was impossible. What Japanese commanders consistently underestimated was the psychological preparation of American forces. Marines and Army soldiers in the Pacific had been extensively briefed on Japanese tactics. They knew Banzai charges were coming. They had trained specifically to maintain discipline under these attacks. Most critically, they had confidence in their weapons. The Marines holding defensive positions on Bougainville that November night understood that their BARs, properly employed, could break any charge if they maintained fire discipline and didn't panic. The defensive positions prepared by Marines on Bougainville reflected lessons learned from earlier battles. Foxholes were positioned to provide interlocking fields of fire with cleared approaches that would expose attacking forces to crossfire. BAR positions were carefully sited to cover the most likely avenues of approach. Ammunition was pre-positioned so that gunners had immediate access to loaded magazines. Alternate positions were prepared in case primary positions became untenable. The perimeter defense doctrine emphasized the importance of maintaining continuous fire. If one position was overrun, adjacent positions would continue firing, creating a defense in depth that forced attackers to fight through multiple defensive lines. This doctrine assumed that some positions would be penetrated, but that the overall defensive line would hold if each position fought to the last. Private First Class John Basiloni's position, on the southeastern portion of the marine perimeter at Lunga Ridge, was considered a critical point in the defense. Intelligence reports suggested that Japanese forces would attempt to break through precisely where Basilone was positioned. His section had been reinforced with additional ammunition and given strict orders to hold at all costs. The position had good fields of fire across approximately 200 yards of relatively clear ground before the jungle began. Any attacking force would have to cross this open area under fire. As the Japanese soldiers began their final preparations in the jungle darkness, Basilone went through his pre-combat checklist with the mechanical precision that training had instilled. Magazine seated properly. Check. Bolt forward, round, chambered. Check. Fire selector set to fast automatic. Check. Gas regulator set to maximum. Check. Spare magazines within immediate reach. Check. Assistant gunner positioned correctly with additional ammunition. Check. The physical sensation of holding a BAR in combat conditions became seared into the memory of every gunner who survived. The weight of the weapon pressing down on tired arms, the heat radiating from the barrel after sustained fire, the sharp smell of burned powder and hot metal, the violent recoil impulse, manageable in short bursts but exhausting over extended firing. The distinctive clatter of the action cycling, brass casings ejecting into the darkness. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The Japanese 23rd Infantry, regiment that prepared to assault the marine positions, represented the Imperial Japanese Army's combat power at its peak. These were veteran soldiers who had fought across China, men who understood infantry tactics and had proven their courage in desperate situations. Their officers were experienced professionals who had studied American defensive methods and developed tactics specifically designed to overwhelm them. They were not the inexperienced, poorly trained forces that American propaganda sometimes portrayed. They were formidable soldiers executing a tactical doctrine that had succeeded repeatedly in previous campaigns. The fundamental flaw in their approach wasn't courage, training, or tactical skill. It was a failure to fully comprehend the transformation in defensive firepower that weapons like the BAR represented. Japanese doctrine had been developed fighting enemies who lacked automatic weapons in significant numbers. Chinese nationalist forces in the 1930s rarely had more than a handful of machine guns per battalion. The tactics that succeeded against such forces, rapid assault, overwhelming numbers, aggressive close combat, were catastrophically unsuited to fighting an enemy where every rifle squad possessed automatic weapons. The charge began at 0330 hours with a sustained artillery barrage from Japanese mountain guns positioned in the hills overlooking the marine perimeter. The shells, smaller caliber than American artillery but fired with desperate intensity, crashed into the defensive positions for 7 minutes. Then, silence. In that silence, every Marine knew what was coming. The first war cries echoed from the jungle, thousands of voices rising in unison. Banzai, Banzai, Banzai! The sound grew louder, building toward a crescendo that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Then the Japanese soldiers emerged from the tree line, 200 yards from Basilione's position. They came in waves, officers with raised swords, leading, soldiers with fixed bayonets following in disciplined lines that covered the entire width of the cleared approach. Basilone opened fire at 180 yards. The BAR bucked against his shoulder, the muzzle flash lighting up the darkness in strobing bursts. Tracers arced toward the approaching mass of soldiers. The first magazine emptied in 2.3 seconds, 9 rounds per second, 20 rounds total, disappearing into the charging formation. Basilone's hands moved automatically, ejecting the spent magazine, reaching for a fresh one, seating it home, resuming fire. 4.8 seconds for the magazine change. In that brief interval, the Japanese advanced another 15 yards. The second magazine emptied. Magazine change. The third magazine emptied. Magazine change. The rhythm became mechanical, divorced from conscious thought. Fire until the bolt locks back. Drop magazine. Insert fresh magazine. Resume fire. Around Basilone, other BARs opened up, creating a symphony of automatic weapons fire that tore into the advancing Japanese formation. The cleared ground became a killing zone, where soldiers fell in clusters, cut down by intersecting streams of fire. The Japanese kept coming. This was the essence of the Banzai charge, to continue despite casualties, to maintain momentum regardless of loss. The soldiers in the rear ranks climbed over the bodies of those who had fallen in front, maintaining the advance, closing the distance. 150 yards, 120 yards, 90 yards. The range decreased with terrifying speed. Basilone's assistant gunner, Private Nash Phillips, fed him magazines as fast as he could fire them. The pile of empty magazines grew beside the position. The barrel of the BAR glowed cherry red in the darkness, so hot that rain hitting the metal turned instantly to steam. Basilone's hands blistered from contact with the overheated weapon, but he continued firing. There was no alternative. Stopping meant death. At 70 yards, the wave of Japanese soldiers hit the first line of defensive positions. Some Marines broke and ran, others fought hand to hand. The Japanese penetration created a salient in the defensive line that threatened to collapse the entire perimeter. Basilone's position, slightly elevated and to the flank of the breakthrough, became critical. He shifted fire, raking the Japanese soldiers who had penetrated the line, firing into their flanks at near point-blank range. The mathematical precision of training dissolved into chaos. Basilone fired without counting rounds, relying on instinct to know when the magazine was nearly empty. He burned through 12 magazines in less than 90 seconds, 240 rounds of sustained automatic fire that created a beaten zone of destruction 40 yards wide. Japanese soldiers attempting to exploit their breakthrough found themselves under fire from multiple directions as other BAR positions shifted to contain the penetration. The barrel of Basilone's bar began to warp from heat stress. The weapon's accuracy degraded noticeably, rounds keyholing and tumbling rather than flying true. But at ranges under 50 yards, accuracy mattered less than volume of fire. Basilone continued firing, holding down the trigger in long bursts that violated every principle of ammunition conservation he had been taught. Conservation didn't matter when Japanese soldiers were 10 yards away. At 0347 hours, 17 minutes after the charge began, Basilone's BAR catastrophically overheated. The barrel warped severely enough that the gas system locked up, turning the automatic rifle into an awkward single-shot weapon. Basilone dropped the useless BAR and grabbed a rifle from a dead Marine beside him. The temporary reduction in firepower from his position allowed a group of approximately 15 Japanese soldiers to reach his foxhole. What followed was close combat of the most desperate kind. Basilone fired the rifle until it was empty, then used it as a club. He retrieved a pistol from another fallen Marine and emptied it into Japanese soldiers at ranges measured in feet. When the pistol was empty, he fought with entrenching tools, fists, anything available. Private Phillips died beside him, bayoneted by a Japanese soldier whom Basilone then killed with his bare hands. The intensity of the fighting around Basilone's position attracted reinforcements from both sides. Marines from adjacent positions moved to support him. Japanese soldiers, seeing the potential breakthrough, concentrated their assault. The fighting became a confused melee in darkness, where identification was nearly impossible and death came from every direction. At 04:15 hours, after 45 minutes of continuous combat, the Japanese assault finally broke. The survivors withdrew into the jungle, leaving behind hundreds of bodies scattered across the approaches to the marine perimeter. Basilone remained at his position, wounded in multiple places, surrounded by dead Japanese and Marines, barely conscious from exhaustion and blood loss. The official Medal of Honor citation, signed by President Franklin Roosevelt on May 21, 1944, described the action with characteristic military understatement. For extraordinary heroism and conspicuous gallantry in action against enemy Japanese forces, above and beyond the call of duty, while serving with the 1st Battalion, 7th Marines, 1st Marine Division, in the Lunga area, Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands, on October 24 and 25, 1942. The citation continued for several paragraphs, detailing how Basilone had contributed materially to the defeat and virtually the annihilation of a Japanese regiment. The actual battle statistics revealed the devastating effectiveness of concentrated bar fire against Banzai charges. The Japanese 23rd Infantry Regiment committed approximately 3,000 soldiers to the assault on the marine perimeter. By dawn, casualty collection teams counted 978 Japanese bodies in front of the marine defensive positions. Prisoner interrogations and captured documents suggested that total Japanese casualties, including wounded who were carried away, exceeded 2,000 men. The regiment had been effectively destroyed as a fighting formation. Marine casualties totaled 193 killed and 312 wounded. The casualty ratio, approximately 10 Japanese dead for every Marine killed, demonstrated the overwhelming advantage that automatic weapons provided to defending forces. Analysis of the battlefield revealed that approximately 60% of Japanese casualties occurred in the cleared approaches to the marine positions, cut down by BAR and machine gun fire before reaching the defensive line. The 12 seconds it took to empty a bar magazine had proven to be survivable if gunners maintained discipline and executed magazine changes efficiently. Post-battle analysis showed that marine positions with functioning BARs had successfully repelled the assault with relatively light casualties. Positions where BARs had malfunctioned or where gunners had been killed early in the fighting suffered dramatically higher casualties, and several were temporarily overrun. The weapons maintenance lessons learned from Bougainville influenced Marine Corps doctrine for the remainder of the war. Bar gunners were instructed to clean and inspect their weapons obsessively, to carry extra firing pins and extractors, to understand every component of the weapon's operating system. The catastrophic overheating that had disabled Basilone's BAR led to new training emphasis on burst fire control and ammunition conservation during sustained engagements. Spare barrel programs were accelerated, though the logistics of distributing spare barrels to frontline units remained challenging throughout the war. Some BAR gunners took to carrying water-soaked rags specifically to cool barrels between engagements, a field expedient solution that risked warping but sometimes prevented complete failure. The trade-offs between sustained fire capability and weapon longevity became a constant calculation for gunners in extended engagements. The psychological impact of surviving a Banzai charge affected American forces in complex ways. Marines who had successfully defended against these assaults gained tremendous confidence in their weapons and tactics. They had faced the terrifying spectacle of thousands of screaming enemy soldiers charging their positions, and they had survived through firepower and discipline. This confidence translated into aggressive tactics in subsequent operations. However, The experience also created lasting trauma. The industrial scale of killing, the mechanical process of firing magazine after magazine into masses of human beings, troubled many participants. Veterans' accounts describe feeling like executioners rather than soldiers, mechanically feeding ammunition into weapons that transformed courage into corpses. The efficiency of the killing, the sheer volume of enemy dead, created moral complications that many struggled with for decades after the war. Japanese forces, despite repeated catastrophic failures, continued launching Banzai charges throughout the Pacific War. The tactical doctrine was so deeply embedded in Japanese military culture that institutional learning proved nearly impossible. Each new generation of officers and soldiers, indoctrinated in the belief that spiritual strength could overcome material disadvantage, repeated the same suicidal tactics with the same devastating results. At Tarawa in November 1943, Japanese forces launched desperate counterattacks against Marine positions that were annihilated by coordinated BAR and machine gun fire. At Saipan in July 1944, the largest Banzai charge of the Pacific War, was destroyed by American firepower. At Peleliu in September 1944, at Iwo Jima in February 1945, at Okinawa in April 1945, the pattern repeated. Japanese courage meeting American firepower winning every time. The few Japanese commanders who recognized the futility of Banzai charges and adapted their tactics achieved significantly better results. General Tadamichi Kuribayashi on Iwo Jima forbade Banzai charges, instead implementing a defense in depth that maximized American casualties through sustained defensive fighting. His tactics proved far more effective than the traditional charge, though ultimately unsuccessful against overwhelming American material superiority. Similarly, General Mitsuru Ushijima on Okinawa initially avoided large-scale charges, though he eventually succumbed to pressure from subordinates who demanded the traditional assault. The Browning automatic rifle remained in American service long after World War II ended. During the Korean War, from 1950 to 1953, the BAR again proved its worth against Chinese human wave attacks that closely resembled Japanese Banzai charges. At battles like Chipyongni and the Chosin Reservoir, American forces armed with BARs broke Chinese assaults through the same combination of firepower and discipline that had succeeded in the Pacific. The weapon's longevity stemmed from its fundamental soundness of design. While lighter automatic rifles like the German FG-42 offered theoretical advantages, the BAR's reliability under adverse conditions made it irreplaceable. The weapon functioned in Arctic cold, tropical heat, desert sand, and jungle humidity. It fired after being submerged in salt water, dropped from vehicles, or subjected to neglect that would disable more sophisticated weapons. This reliability, combined with devastating firepower, ensured the BAR remained in frontline service until the M14 rifle replaced it in the early 1960s. The industrial production of BARs during World War II demonstrated American manufacturing capacity at its peak. Between 1940 and 1945, American factories produced approximately 213,000 BARs, with production ramping up from fewer than 10,000 per year in 1940 to over 50,000 per year by 1943. The weapon's complexity, with over 100 precision-machined parts, made this production achievement remarkable. 3 manufacturers produced BARs during the war: Winchester Repeating Arms Company, Colt Patent Firearms Manufacturing Company, and International Business Machines Corporation. The involvement of IBM, a company known for office equipment rather than firearms, illustrated the total mobilization of American industry for war production. IBM's factory in Poughkeepsie, New York, converted from producing typewriters and calculators to manufacturing BARs with minimal disruption, demonstrating the flexibility of American industrial capacity. Quality control standards for BAR production exceeded those for most other weapons. Each completed weapon underwent extensive testing, including proof firing, accuracy testing, and function testing under various conditions. Rejection rates ran approximately 8%, with rejected weapons returned for correction rather than accepted with defects. This quality standard ensured that BARs delivered to combat units would function reliably, a critical factor given the weapon's importance to squad-level tactics. The ammunition logistics for supporting BARs in combat operations strained supply systems throughout the Pacific War. A single BAR firing at maximum rate could expend 650 rounds per minute, emptying 32 20-round magazines in 60 seconds of sustained fire. In practice, engagement durations rarely exceeded several minutes, but the potential ammunition consumption required elaborate supply arrangements. Marine rifle companies typically carried approximately 20,000 rounds of 30-06 ammunition, with roughly 30% allocated to BAR use. This allocation provided each BAR with approximately 500 rounds, or 25 magazines, substantially more than the gunner could physically carry. The additional ammunition was distributed among other squad members, who would pass magazines forward during sustained engagements. This distribution system worked adequately in defensive positions where ammunition could be pre-positioned, but created challenges during offensive operations where resupply was difficult. The evolution of American infantry tactics from 1941 through 1945 reflected growing understanding of how to employ automatic weapons effectively. Early doctrine treated the BAR as a light machine gun, positioning it in static defensive roles with emphasis on sustained fire. Combat experience revealed that the weapon's true strength lay in mobility, combined with firepower, the ability to advance with riflemen while providing suppressive fire that was impossible with bolt-action weapons. By 1944, Marine and Army doctrine emphasized the BAR as the base of fire around which rifle squads maneuvered. The standard fire and movement technique had one element providing suppressive fire, including the BAR, while another element advanced. This tactical innovation multiplied infantry effectiveness by allowing continuous pressure on enemy positions rather than the alternating fire and movement that characterized bolt-action rifle tactics. The training pipeline for BAR gunners evolved substantially during the war. Initial training focused primarily on marksmanship and basic weapon maintenance. Combat experience revealed that successful BAR employment required additional skills, including understanding of fields of fire, coordination with other squad weapons, ammunition management during extended engagements, and most critically, the psychological conditioning to maintain fire discipline under the stress of Banzai charges. Advanced BAR training, implemented in late 1943, included realistic combat simulations where trainees defended positions against simulated human wave attacks. Training cadre, often veterans of Pacific fighting, emphasized the importance of controlled bursts, efficient magazine changes, and maintaining fire rather than seeking cover when under assault. These simulations, while necessarily artificial, provided psychological preparation that proved valuable in actual combat. The individual experiences of BAR gunners varied tremendously based on the intensity of combat they encountered. Some gunners served entire tours without firing their weapons in anger, assigned to rear area duties or fortunate enough to avoid major engagements. Others, like John Basilone, experienced combat of extraordinary intensity, where survival depended entirely on weapon reliability and personal skill. The common thread connecting all BAR gunners was the weight, physical and psychological, of knowing that their weapon represented their squad's primary firepower. The post-war analysis of Japanese tactical failures emphasized the fundamental mismatch between their doctrine and the reality of American firepower. Japanese infantry regulations, largely unchanged since the 1930s, assumed that aggressive close assault could overcome defensive firepower if pressed with sufficient determination. This assumption, valid against Chinese forces with limited automatic weapons, proved catastrophically wrong against American forces, where every infantry squad possessed multiple automatic weapons. Japanese after-action reports, captured after the war, revealed growing awareness of the problem among junior officers and enlisted soldiers. Multiple documents described the devastating effectiveness of American automatic weapons and recommended tactical modifications, including night attacks to reduce visibility, dispersed formations to minimize casualties from automatic fire, and infiltration tactics rather than massed charges. These recommendations were largely ignored by senior commanders, who remained committed to traditional assault doctrine. The failure of Japanese military leadership to adapt tactics reflected broader institutional problems within the Imperial Japanese Army. The military culture emphasized obedience to established doctrine, discouraged initiative from junior officers, and treated tactical modifications as evidence of insufficient fighting spirit. Officers who suggested defensive tactics or acknowledged American material superiority risked being labeled defeatist or cowardly. This institutional rigidity turned courage into liability and determination into self-destruction. The human cost of this institutional failure was staggering. Estimates suggest that over 100,000 Japanese soldiers died in Banzai charges or similar assault tactics during the Pacific War. These casualties, representing Japan's most experienced and determined soldiers, accomplished little beyond demonstrating the obsolescence of their tactics. The soldiers themselves showed extraordinary courage, attacking positions they must have known were likely to kill them. Their commanders showed extraordinary negligence in ordering such attacks repeatedly, despite consistent failure. The American development of the BAR and its employment doctrine represented a fundamentally different approach to warfare. Rather than emphasizing individual courage or spiritual strength, American doctrine focused on creating tactical systems that multiplied effectiveness through coordination and technology. The BAR was one component of this system, working in conjunction with riflemen, machine guns, mortars, and artillery to create layered defenses that could defeat any assault regardless of enemy determination. This systematic approach extended beyond weapons to include logistics, medical support, training, and leadership development. American forces assumed that courage and determination were constants available to all armies, that Japanese soldiers were as brave as American soldiers. The difference lay not in intangible qualities but in measurable factors including firepower, supply, coordination, and tactical doctrine. Wars were won by superior systems, not superior spirit. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.